Hello, everyone. I'm going to just get started now because everyone was so patiently waiting in the lobby for a little bit. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to read my remarks that I wrote. Sometimes I will wing it and sometimes I will write it, but I rarely can do both at the same time. So welcome to Archives and Art, the Resources and Possibilities at the State Historical Society of Iowa. My name is Mia Boo. If I've never met you before, I am the Senior Manager of Museum Learning and Engagement here at the Des Moines Art Center. It's truly an honor to be with you all today. This program came together when I first began learning about Iowa artist Henry Payer's practice and his specific interest in activating history within his work and wanting to find ways to encourage how history can inspire, inform, and contribute to contemporary art and understanding. With a quick show of hands, who here has had some time to explore Henry Payer's exhibition already? Okay, a few folks. This will be fun for folks who have not seen his work. I'm particularly inspired by the stuff that he creates, so this is my connection and tie, but you will access this in a different way and then hopefully then be curious to go explore his work after. For those who don't know, Henry is a Ho-Chunk mixed media Iowa artist living and working in Sioux City. In his exhibition, Agakinak Hachiwi, which is We Live Opposite Each Other, it opened last month here at the museum, and it's going to be on view until the end of the summer. So behind me, throughout the time that I'm speaking, I have 4 works from Henry's rotating behind me, and particularly mentioning the list of materials that he uses in these, because that is something that we're interested in and exploring today specifically. The other day, I was looking at his work in the gallery with a visitor who told me that the reuse of historical materials made them feel sad. I've been thinking about that comment a lot because it opens up some powerful questions around value, around stories, and around access. Henry has said, "I value the art over the paper that we're placing value on, and the artwork that's on top of it in an effort to push my art forward." For me, that raises questions around what it means to push art forward and whose perspectives get to do that pushing, especially when those perspectives are playing out across objects and images that already carry meaning. So like I said, behind me today, I have a few slides illustrating 4 of Henry's artworks, specifically noting the materials that he used to create them. Many of the historical materials that Henry uses were purchased online or at thrift stores, flea markets, and antique shops, many in Sioux City and Decorah, Iowa, areas that have a sense of home to Henry. And that makes me wonder, is reclaiming these objects a form of preserving or of loss? Would they have been better left in attics or boxes? Who is responsible for keeping tangible history, and what resources do they have to do so? And what happens when creative work allows those materials to speak again in new ways? That same visitor that I was talking with concluded our chat with something quietly profound. Eventually, no one knows the people in the family photos. For me, that sentence sits at the heart of this conversation. Henry has spoken about how the work he creates contributes to the history of cultural significance of his Ho-Chunk ancestors. Though his methods and materials may not be traditional, he, in his words, is a modern-day living, breathing Indigenous man. He says, "I try to ground my work in the development of artworks that are based on Ho-Chunk aesthetics, as opposed to being a diversion from that." When spending time with his artwork, certain materials and elements appear again and again. One example is stereographs, an early form of 3D imaging. There it is, it's perfect timing, where we use 2 nearly identical photographs and a viewing device. They were a popular form of virtual tourism in the late 19th and 20th century, and Henry first encountered these through Historical Society archives. He has shared that the Sioux City Public Museum holds a particularly strong collection, and he's interested in how Indigenous figures, sometimes even his own ancestors, are depicted and circulated through these images. So archives, in this context, are not abstract. They're personal, they're cultural, they're relational. The materials themselves matter. His repeated use of items like antique ledger paper and military blankets hold entirely different meanings within Indigenous histories of displacement and survival. When Henry works on these surfaces, stamps, newspaper clippings, photographs, postcards, stereographs, the past and present are not separated, they sit on top of one another. He has described this as a kind of historic superimposition. Henry says, "I understand that having culture survive is more important than contributing to the art world, whatever that may be. I'm trying to get people to question and learn more, not only about their cultural perspective, but about history." And he's very clear that this isn't just his history, it's American history, regional history, state and local history, as well as Indigenous history. So that impulse to question, to stay with discomfort, to reimagine how we can talk about history now and in the future, is what brought me to want to make space for this conversation. Archives reflect choices and hold enormous possibilities, especially when artists, historians, and community members are invited in relationship with them. To help us think more about these possibilities and to make the work of archives feel accessible rather than distant, I'm very glad to welcome Andrew Klumpp. Andrew Klumpp, PhD, is a public historian at the State Historical Society of Iowa, where he oversees public programs, educational initiatives, and community outreach. Each year, his team engages with more than 23,000 people, from preschoolers to lifelong learners, through exhibitions, t-shirt, professional development, and community festivals. Since 2020, he has also served as editor of the Annals of Iowa, the Society's award-winning academic history journal. Today, Andrew will share the breadth of materials held within the State Historical Society's archives and talk about how artists, historians, and the general public can engage with these collections, not as experts only, but as curious participants. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Klumpp.
Well, thank you for being here on a Sunday. After the snow, everybody got dug out. I guess it's been a couple days, but still, some of my neighbors have not dug out yet, as I learned on my walk with my dog this morning. So, for better, for worse. As Mia said, my name is Andrew Klumpp, and I work at the State Historical Society of Iowa. I'm originally from Iowa. I grew up here, but I came to the profession that I'm in, which is being a historian, a public historian, kind of by chance. I'm the first in my family to go to college, so this is not a world that I really grew up in or knew a lot about. I knew a lot about farming. I knew a lot about feed schedules, for cattle and that kind of thing. I grew up in far northwest Iowa in a very small town. And so when Mia says this is for everyone, it is, I kind of have learned as I've gone. And I'm here and also not just to represent the work that I do, but to represent the whole team that I get to work with. A lot of this presentation was also put together by our reference librarians and special collections archivists. So there's wonderful archival professionals that I'm here representing today and using some of their work too. So I'm happy to talk about what I know. And then if there are questions that you have that I don't have the answers for, there are wonderful people who know even more than I do. And so I want to at least give a hat tip right at the beginning to those wonderful folks who really do take care of the collections, who do know these collections really well, and also put together a lot of this presentation that I get to give to you today, though you'll see that it is also mine. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. So I mentioned that I am, or you can see I'm a PhD by training. And this is a little piece of art that I found in my own research. So as you likely know, PhDs are very specific. And so what I studied was the global consciousness of 19th century religious immigrants from the Netherlands to the Midwest. So that's what I studied, right? With the argument being, I grew up not far from Orange City, which is like northwest Iowa's Pella. And the argument that I was exploring was that these little towns actually thought a lot about the world around them. They didn't, and not just their little tiny communities. And I found that that was true in a lot of places and a lot of different research. But there is also this fun doodle that I found in my research. I'm calling it a doodle. It's a lot like a comic, but you never would have found it if you weren't in the archive. And this is actually from the Joint Archives of Holland, Michigan, which is where I did a lot of my research. But what this is it shows someone at a desk with a really dramatic coat and spilling some ink, but there's a map of the world, and I've blown that up a little bit for you to see. It's totally wrong. If you look at that map, right, you've got lots of misspellings and the Atlantic Ocean, and then you can see Hope College, which is where the students were, which is in Michigan, kind of in the middle of what they're calling Baffin's Bay. Greece is spelled wrong, and Asia and Australia. But I point this out because this is this comic, this doodle, that is my dissertation in a nutshell, right? I spent 300 pages talking about how this tiny little community, these little towns, thought about, conceived of, and imagined the global world in a very unique way that was distinct to them. And there's this little piece of art that a student wrote or drew in this notebook. You can see the notebook lines if you get really close. Just drew it in a notebook. That's my dissertation. You could just show that picture. And I highlight that because that's the power of the art that you can find in the archive. So when we talk today about not only how archives and our resources can inform art, there's also ways that what you find when you're digging, especially when you find little moments and glimpses of art, can inform the way that we understand the archives, the material, the special collections that are around us. And so I start there because that's my story, right? Is being like, oh, there it is. There's this way that this comic, this kind of picture, illustrates a lot of what I've thought about over the years. But you're here to learn about the Historical Society. This is our mission statement. You can read it. In reality, the Historical Society has a dual mission of preservation and education. I normally get to represent the education side of that dual mission, but there's also the preservation aspect. If you come down to our building, which is right down, really, if you hop on University or Grand here and just keep going until you can't go anymore, you'll get to our building, or until you get to the old Wallace building, it's being torn down. We're right there, right across the street. We're right downtown, but we have these incredible collections. Over 2 million pieces of paper are held in our collection. That's state archives, historical libraries, special collections, and then almost 100,000 objects in our museum collection. So we divide our collections into several different categories. We'll talk more today about those research collections, but we can also talk a little bit about the museum. But education, preservation, there's a lot more fancy words that put some more meat on that, but that's what we're here to do. And in particular today, we're focusing on the historical library and archives. And so when we think about our overall our structure, you have my team, which is education and outreach, you have a museum team, a historic sites team, and then you have a library and archives bureau that takes care of all of the paper, most of the paper, that kind of thing. I come at this honestly because I used to be a part of the Historical Library and Archives Bureau, and then I moved over. So these are also my people. It's where I spend a lot of my time as well, doing research. They exist to identify, record, collect, preserve, and share resources, right? So this is not just preservation, but identification, bringing things in, collecting, helping to tell that whole story, and then make it available. If you wanted to go down, our next open day is Wednesday, and see almost any of these records, they will pull them for you so that you can see them or help you get access to those that are online. And so that is a big part of what we do, isn't just to preserve these things, but also make them available to Iowans and to anyone who comes through. We have people, last fall, we had 2 women who came all the way from Australia and spent a week just having a hoot in they laughed so much. They had so much fun, but they were researching their ancestors, and those people had come through Iowa, and they were digging through our things. And so, yes, this is for Iowans, but the people that come are from truly all over the world, and it's really special. So when we talk about this, I've kind of given you a glimpse, but this gives you a little bit of what is a language that you would need to have if you wanted to kind of decipher what's going on in the first place, right? If you're anything like me, you've rolled up to a new place and you think you're using a word right, and the people, you're like speaking past each other, right? And so what do we say when we mean these things? Historical library, think of anything that's been officially published. That's a shorthand. So you see here books, periodicals, newspapers, vital records, that kind of thing. If it's been published by a publisher, it goes there. So That's how I make sense of it. Special collections, those are going to be things like diaries, letters, manuscripts, maps. Any photograph that we have goes in a special collection for the most part, with a few exceptions, right? So that becomes anything that's unpublished and wasn't produced by the state. So if you want a shorthand there. And then state archives is anything that was produced by or a product of the state government. So those are really quick and dirty, as I used to tell my students, kind of buckets for you. If you're thinking, okay, you're talking to our archivist, you want to understand what they're saying. If it was produced by the state, it belongs in state archives. Oh, it was a book, it'll be in the library. We'll always help you. We'll always help you find those things. But those are just some quick guidelines for what we have. So where can you get started? I encourage you to get started online. Do a little exploring. Our website, not complicated, history.iowa.gov. I'll show you where to go to look at things, but we have everything in an online catalog. I know growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, we had a little catalog for our books in the Hartley Melvin Sanborn Public Library or high school library. If you haven't been in a public library since then, it's just like that. Just like the Des Moines Public Library, we have the same kind of catalog system, and you can search for just about anything, and it'll tell you what we have. But everything, for the most part, is in there. We do have some things that are still on card catalogs, and for those who are too young to remember card catalogs, those were little tiny note cards that had all that detail on it, but almost everything that we have is searchable online in our catalog. And this is where you'd go to find it. So sometimes I'm a visual learner. I can remember if I've seen a picture. If you go to our website, this is what it looks like, and what we've circled there, the Iowa History Collection catalog will take you there. That'll also help you see our museum collection. I didn't highlight that earlier because it's a part of a different branch of the organization, but our museum collection is in there as well. And that's where you'll see some of the art. I'm going to highlight some of the pieces of art that we have in our museum collection, but those will be there too. So anything that we have, for the most part, can be found in some way, and often there's a picture of it in there as well. Not always, I should say. There's not always a picture, but sometimes if you want to see something, you just email us and we'll go take a picture of it, or get a scan of it, or work with you to have that pulled so that you can see it in person. There's some really incredible things that you can see if you come down to the building. So collections is another spot I'll highlight for you. If you don't want to go to the catalog and you want to explore by type, so let's say you're working on a project and you're looking for photos, or you're looking for a certain type of thing, this top button here will take you to our collections, and that takes you to a page that looks like this. If you scroll down, there'll be more, but these are guides to big categories that exist within those collections. So does that make sense? So it's kind of like nesting, you kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so this will give you some more information on all those things, especially things like census records. Those can be kind of complicated, or photos. We have a lot of different ways that you can access them that'll just give you another way in if you don't know exactly what you're looking for and you're just trying to find a way to be inspired. So we'll look at a few different collections. Books and periodicals, right? This is what it is, right? Books and periodicals, that's going to have as well, right? So it is the obvious stuff, right? If you are looking for the newest book on Iowa history, we probably have it. If you'd like to read the journal that I publish, we have it. But there's also going to be things like city directories. If you would like to go through old phone books, we have them. If you would like to go through old census records that have been published, we have them. All kinds of newsletters, city directories, these kinds of things, we have them. And I don't know, maybe they're interesting, maybe they're not, depending on your project, but there are all kinds of different ways you can get at information. I find something like a phone book, right? At least growing up, we always had a phone book. My grandmother still has a phone book. I don't know what she uses it for, but she has a phone book. And so there are these things that all of a sudden you can go in, and it actually tells a story of a community in really interesting ways. You get into the yellow pages and you see all the different businesses that maybe aren't there anymore, or the way that they didn't used to include area codes, or sometimes even the town code, right? I grew up in a town where our first three numbers were 729, but there was a lot of times they just wrote like call Bob at 3708 to find out about your next plumbing deal, right? Everyone knew that Bob lived in town. And so there's some of those ways that even something like a phone book can tell a story. We have all of those county histories, things like that, that begin to capture those. Especially early county histories are going to have maps, often plat maps, that show you who lived where and what they were doing. And they're, in the late 1800s, a lot of them had kind of, you could pay, so you had to pay, but they would call them notable residents in the county, and they would write up these biographies of these wonderful people who had found a town or been a part of a town. And you can find out a lot of times about ancestors, and there's also ways to see who's missing, right? That's another thing you can find in these stories. There's a great genealogist here in town named Ricky King who does a lot of work on Black Iowans throughout the entire state. And oftentimes the people that she finds in her work as a genealogist are in different places than where you would find those notable figures in a county history, for instance. But she's still finding them, often through things that are published, but sometimes through some of these other categories. We also have newspapers. Newspapers are very popular, right? Most of our newspapers are going to be on something called microfilm, or they're going to be digitized. So microfilm, for those who don't know, are these little canisters of like a film negative, really, that you put into a machine and allows you to read them. Because if we collect newspapers from all over the state, so all over Iowa, we have them dating back to the very earliest newspapers that came out of Burlington in the 1830s. And so we have them all, but that's a lot of space, and newspaper paper is very acidic. So I don't know if that's a thing that folks know, but it's very acidic, which means it will break down very quickly over time relative to other paper. And so the way to best preserve newspapers is to take care of them, but then to put them in microfilm, which was an early form of digitization. And then a lot of them are also available in newspapers.com, things like that. And so all of these things are either online or available through the microfilms. And so highly encourage you to look at those two. They tell incredible stories. And we also have non-English newspapers. So that's something that to be aware of. A lot of immigrant communities in Iowa published in their native language and still do. And we collect those as well, which is an interesting way to capture those stories. So I find newspapers fascinating. I could talk about them all day, but I won't, because we've all got things to do and there's a lot more to share. This is some of what you can see, though, in these newspapers. Some of that, again, you have illustrations, you have advertisements. It's not just the articles that are in the newspaper that can be incredibly useful. It's often the ads. What are they talking about? I use newspapers extensively in my research on Dutch people. In the 1870s, when they talked about politics and they reported candidate slates, right? So a fun difference I found in my work is in the English language newspaper in Orange City, they had a Republican ticket and they had a Democratic ticket, and they advertised them. And in the Dutch newspaper, they had an our ticket and a their ticket. Right? They didn't divide by party. They said, this is who we're voting for, this is who we're not voting for, but only when they were speaking Dutch, right? Like, so only if you could read Dutch would you realize that's what they were doing. That was in early days in the 1870s. But an interesting thing that the newspaper captured, that if you read the county history, they wouldn't necessarily have said that. But in the newspaper, you can see they're saying, hey, we need to vote together as all these people, and this is who we're voting for. Everybody get in line. Interesting stuff that you can capture in the newspaper. County records. This is stuff that in Iowa, and this is where it can be a little bit confusing. Every state does it a little differently. But in Iowa, you have county level records of births, of deaths, of marriages. You have probate records, deeds, all of the things that you think of when you have to interact even with the county today, right? You apply for a marriage license at the county, not at the state, that kind of thing. And so we have all of those records. Again, those are going to be digitized or on microfilm, but we have worked with the counties throughout Iowa to collect a lot of those records. There's a full listing on our website, and those are going to be on microfilm as well. But it can tell you the story of who was married to who. Probate records, people spend a lot of time in there. As you're looking to tell the story of people or places, these can be really revealing. And it just depends on what you're interested in. There are some limits on when you can get access to those, and I'll mention that in a little bit. For instance, 75 years after a marriage, it becomes public record. So you can't see who got married well, you could in the newspaper from last week, but you won't find those records until they're officially released on a schedule that's been put out. This is some examples of what you would find on a reel. These are probate records, wills, which can be really fascinating, and then land deeds are also really interesting. These are the kinds of records I was talking to my dad about my great something grandmother. I forget how far back it is exactly, but she owned land along with her husband. They claimed land in the Homestead Act, and he claimed land, and so did she, which was notable because almost everyone in the county who had claimed land was a man, and there were about 3 women who also claimed land as homesteaders, and my great-great-great-grandmother, Phoebe, was one of them. And that's something that you can find in the land records, is not just who's doing it, but, there was a woman who was claiming land. What's her story? How did that work? And those are things that you can capture and document in these kinds of records. Census records, everybody loves a census, I feel like. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people who visit us do. Those are available. Again, those are released. The federal censuses are available up to 1950, and the state of Iowa conducted its own census on the off year, so every 5 years, and those went until 1925, and we have those records as well, and they can get very detailed. I'm working with a group of kids from Winterset later this week where we're going to look at immigration populations in Madison County in these Iowa censuses, because they're tracking immigration numbers, but they're also tracking how much rye was planted, how much corn was planted, that kind of thing, and so you can really get a picture of what was happening through these census data, but they don't always ask the same question either. They're always counting people, but you can also see the kinds of things that people are counting and sometimes some of the language that they're using about people, right? There's certainly outdated terms or classifications of people that we wouldn't count today, but it shows you how people were thinking at the time. So these are the vital records I mentioned a little bit earlier. This is something, too, where the state of Iowa eventually starts counting some of these things and the county doesn't. This is where I would tell you to contact us if you have questions. And by us, I mean not me, my colleagues who are the librarians and those folks. They know exactly where those lines are in a way that I've got it all here for you. When divorces start being collected at the state, birth, marriage, that kind of thing, but they're really the experts on how to get some of those things. There's also some records that are still closed and some that are restricted forever. So Iowa's, the eugenics program that was run in Iowa is a restricted collection for the privacy of those who survived it, right, and who were a part of it. So often, if there are things that are restricted, it has to do with personal privacy of those who went through that. You can still access those, you just have to sign certain papers, that kind of thing. But those are also managed by the health department. So that's one thing about state archives that's also worth noting is we have everything that other agencies have given us, but as long as they want to continue managing their records, they can hold on to them. So right now, Health and Human Services manages a number of those records because they're still relevant to telling their story, and they haven't transferred them to the state archive. And so we work with other agencies to help you get what you want as well. And then special collections, these are really fun. These are going to be, like I said, diaries, business records, Civil War letters. There's so much good stuff in here. Photos, personal papers. There's, working with for this Winterset visit, right? There's diaries of people who were immigrants coming across the state of Iowa. Incredible maps. We have a map from 1836 that shows where Native people were ceding land or still existing in what was the Louisiana Purchase that shows you a snapshot of that. We have the actual map. We have a map of the Mormon Trail that crosses southern Iowa that came out of Utah. Things like that are really special and capture those things, those stories in really unique ways. There's a lot of finding aids in the catalog, and a finding aid will tell you what's in it. So for instance, I'm looking at several boxes of the Ray collection, and it will tell you, okay, here is the diaries, here are these personal papers, that kind of thing. So if you have questions about what's there, a finding aid gives you, it's a cheat sheet for lack of a better word. And we'll look at some of the things. This is an example of a scrapbook. So you have a scrapbook with a drawing of the Iowa flag, and then we also have the Yonkers collection, and those are going to be business records. Those are going to be receipts, details, advertisements, memos, that kind of thing. When Yonkers closed down here in Des Moines, they actually invited us down to help collect what we thought would be important for the state. We did something similar when Iowa Wesleyan closed a few years ago. Our team went down and worked with Iowa Wesleyan to decide what could come and tell that story here at the state, and what a lot went to the University of Iowa and other repositories, but we were a part of capturing those and making sure those stories stay told. Photographs are some of our most popular. This is where you can find them. Right now we still have our photograph collections divided by Des Moines and Iowa City, because we had for many years an Iowa City branch, and so those photos are labeled and marked so that we know where those are and where they came from, still distinct in the catalog. But you can see those. I use this Portraits of Notable Iowans all the time in my education work. It'll have a list of thousands of Iowans, and you can see if we have a portrait of them, and then I normally just email Jessica, the Special Collections Archivist, and say, hey, do you have that portrait of Billy Sunday? I really need him. And she says, sure, I will help you. So here are some examples of photos. We have a lot of wonderful things on railroads and early cities, businesses, lots of big categories, and they can be really inspiring. They are also the kinds of things that if you want to use them in publication, you just work with us on getting those rights and permissions and that kind of thing. There is a process by which you can do that. You can also explore a lot of these online on our Flickr page. So Flickr will give you a guide to a lot of our collections, and a lot of these continue to go up as we are able to digitize. The State Fair one is a lot of fun because you can tell the whole story of the State Fair through multiple years, so it's a good one. Maps, I love a map. I just mentioned some things about maps. These are also going to be special collections. You have some great ways of telling the story of how Iowa has changed. One that we use with students a lot, there's a map of Iowa with all 100 counties, right, from 1856. And if most of you know, Iowa has 99 counties. Well, Kossuth County used to be 2 counties, Bancroft and Kossuth, but they decided Bancroft was too swampy and was never going to have much of a economy, and so so Kossuth absorbed it, right? But we have that map from that brief moment of time when there were 100 before it went away. So we can tell those stories. I love a good map story. And then we have state archives. These are going to be things that are the records of the state of Iowa and the business of the state. So some examples I've got here for you are governor's records, adjutant general, that's very popular if you're interested in the Civil War. State Fair, also very popular. Highway commissions. Some of the state birth and death records are here as well. Sometimes they're counted both at the county level and the state level. And you can see some of these things are specifically called out by their number. So RG is just short for record group. So I can tell you record group 42 is governors, and all governors have them. And so if you were looking for Brandstad, it'd be record group 42 Brandstad, that kind of thing. And so that's what those mean. But this will give you a sense of what we would have in those. And for the most part, we maintain things, but not quite everything. Not every record is a permanent record, right? So like an internal memo that says, like, Dear Sally, don't forget to bring your potluck lunch, like that's not going to be here forever probably, but those permanent records stay, and those go all the way back to the founding of the state. These are some examples, personnel files for the National Guard, Civil War. Civil War records are very popular, and because the state played a big role in that, we see those there. And then we've got governor records. I'll talk a little bit more about those, but a lot of correspondence or pardons, that kind of thing, you'll find in the governor's records. So, let's see, I'm going to keep moving right along because I know I'm watching our time. This is a good example. Now, so that's a quick overview of what you'll find in each one. I want to talk a little bit about how we have found art in these archives. So and recognizing where we are and what you might be interested in. If you're interested in finding art in the actual collections, sometimes you can be surprised. Like I mentioned earlier, I found that comic. I found this. This was one of the best things I've found ever in an archive. And I was doing a project focused on Iowa and the farm crisis of the 1980s. And I was very deep into the letters that Terry Branstad received in the mid to early 80s from Iowans documenting their experience with the farm crisis. And if you ever need a good cry, go read those letters. It was heartbreaking. Some of the most difficult research I've ever done, just how heavy it was. This is a note that was a hand-drawn postcard from a guy in Davenport, and I call it the crying pig, but he had drawn these pigs, and one of them was crying, and on the back, he writes a quick note to the governor that says, our farmers are suffering. What are you doing, Governor Branstad, to help our farmers? They're crying like this pig, something like that. It's a paraphrase. But it's this incredible little piece. You can find it, actually, it's on display in our Civics in Action exhibit down at the museum right now. But a really incredible thing. You're not looking for art in the state archives necessarily, reading through these letters, but there it was, how someone was choosing to express his own distraught experience in this moment. We also have art in our museum collections. So I want to highlight that. This is Althea Sherman. She was from National, Iowa. She's known as like a pioneering ornithologist / painter. So she had an incredible career as a painter early on, and then her parents got sick, so she came home and became an ornithologist and like a pioneering researcher about chimney swifts, one of the first women to be admitted to like the American Ornithological Society. She's really just a dynamo, but we have a lot of her early nature paintings and tell the story of her as a conservationist and advocate for nature. She's coming up alongside people like Ding Darling, who is also another famous artist who's living at around the same time. And Iowa is really having a conservation moment during her lifetime, right? You have people like Lewis Pamel and the founding of the state parks, right? And so she helps tell that story. You have these incredible, this incredible artwork. And the last artwork I'll highlight is really kind of a really remarkable piece, one of the best pieces of art we have in our collection. I'm not an art critic, but I'm just going to guess. This on your left is an Andrew Clemens sand art bottle, and it is made entirely of sand. They're made in old chemist bottles. This one's about this big. There's a core of clay, and then he takes individual grains of sand and created this incredible piece and a number of other incredible pieces. This on the front is George Washington riding a horse. You can't see it in this picture, but there is a cannon in the back in the shadow. And then if you turn it around, there's the Iowa State seal, and there is a ship. And he makes it all in glass or in sand. And what you can kind of tell is that the opening for this bottle would have been on the bottom, right? You can see the top is curved. And so that meant that he would have had it upside down and filled it in upside down. Incredible. He's an incredible story, too. He grows up in McGregor, Iowa, and he gets sick as a child and loses his hearing. And so he is both deaf and mute for his entire life, goes to the Iowa School for the Deaf in Council Bluffs, comes home, and these are sands that are largely taken from what is now Pikes Peak State Park and transformed into really remarkable sand art. I remember the first time I saw this, and they told me they were going to show me some sand art, and I was thinking of my old sand art, where it was like yellow, green, purple, and this is just really meticulous, marvelous work, some of the best sand art that I've ever seen, if not the best sand art. We have a number of his pieces, but these are things in the collection that show some of the art. And then I want to highlight very briefly, and then we'll have some time for questions, how the archives and our collections have then informed art. And I want to be clear here, there's this dynamic relationship between, and Mia mentioned this earlier, of we preserve and educate about these things, right? But then art often uses historical materials for the creation and retelling of stories, and that's a balance. We have things in our permanent collection that will never be turned into art, for instance, but that doesn't mean that we can't help inform finding things that wouldn't have been in a permanent collection and may have been destined for someone else's didn't have a use for anymore, and we can transform and tell those stories. The first is a piece I got to work with with a Des Moines photographer, Molly Wood, and this was a celebration of the 175th anniversary of Iowa statehood in 2021. We asked artists to to tell the story of Iowa and to help to capture this in art. And Molly put forward a piece, but what you can see here is her telling the story of Iowa. You can see monarch butterflies, and you can see milkweed, and you can see prairie flowers. But what's also in there are original bound volumes of the Annals of Iowa, original bound volumes of some of the earliest 1863 pieces of this journal that we had. And we worked with Molly, in this case, because she's a photographer, and that meant that things wouldn't be destroyed or damaged. We worked with her to lend a few pieces, and she took those and took photos of them. So you're looking at those books that are standing there at actual things that we still have in our collection from the 1860s when the journal was founded, some of the earliest pieces. And then the crock that the flowers are in is inspired by the kinds of crocks that would have existed at the time. We didn't have anything in our collection that she used, but that again is informed by what we had in our collection, and she created that to tell that story and capture in this really dynamic photo Iowa and the 175 years of telling that story. This is another piece that Julia Franklin, who's another Des Moines-based artist, built with me, and I love it very much. I discovered after I started that my predecessors really wanted to make sure we had enough inventory for sale, let's say it that way, of the old issues of the journal. We had a lot of extra issues of the journal that were not going anywhere. And so we had everything in our permanent collection, but then we had a number of issues that we were sharing with libraries, with school children. And we approached Julia about telling the story of the history of the publications office through art. And so these are not things that were part of the collection. These are things that were inventory, and that's different. They were meant to always go out into the community. And what Julia did was she took these and created art you can find in our research center now to tell the story. And what they have is some of the earliest issues of the journal. What I love that she did is you have in memoriams. As editors retired, they would write their little story, and she has a number of them kind of talking to each other in this piece in a way that the journal could never have done itself, right? The journal published these every 3 or 4 years, for a while then every 15, then 30, because editors stayed even longer. But Julia all of a sudden creates and puts something into a story that I've had people walk in and see it and start crying, because these are the people that they've worked a whole career with, and all their stories are there together. And I see that, and I get chills looking at it, because these are men and women who did the work before I did, who have contributed, and they're all there together in she creates a chorus through her art, through things that, in a way that tells the story of the work of the journal and the society that it wouldn't have told without her format, right? So art really transforms the way that's told. And then the last thing I'll highlight is Seth Hedquist, who is a musician based in central Iowa as well, who works in agri-music. And what he has done, and it's really remarkable, and I encourage you to check him out, is he's taken portions of Teddy Roosevelt's country life survey from the early 1900s, where they're surveying and telling the story of rural life, and he takes actual quotations that Iowans were talking about, and he sets them to music to tell the story of the transformation of rural life during this time period, but through music. It's really, really remarkable, because he's taking these words that are in these historical documents and creating and telling the story in a really interesting, artistic, and dramatic way, right? And so that's another example, more like Molly's, to where he's not transforming anything or destroying any of these archival records, but in absolute dynamic ways, the work of digging into historical resources is transforming and actually being told with even more layers because of the way he's able to dig into it. It's really remarkable stuff. I'm looking at my time, and I'm going to just move on so we have a little time for questions. Come check us out. We are just, again, down the street, Wednesday through Friday, 9 to 4:30, and Saturdays we're open from 9 to 3. If you want to pull special things, I always just encourage people, if you want to get the most out of your visit, you can always just walk in. We'd love to have you. But if you want to get the most out of your visit and you're looking for something specific, shoot one of our reference librarians an email and say, hey, I'm coming in. I saw you have this, this, and this. and they'll have it ready to go for you, or they'll help make sure you have everything you want. You know, like, you don't have to have an appointment, you do not have to do that, but if you know what you want, they'll have it ready to go and you can hit the ground running. And either way will get you what you need. But you can also schedule an appointment, which again helps make sure you get what you need, but you don't have to. All right, I feel like I've been going fast and furious, but we've got time for questions, so.
Do you let people go behind the scenes and just general tours?
Yeah, so the question is, do people get to go behind the scenes? And we have a couple different ways that we do that. One, we do offer tours of our collection storage space. Those are either on demand. If they're on demand, we charge a little bit for them, not much. It's like $10 per person. But we also offer them every quarter. We have a free collections tour. And those collections tours can be both for adults, and then we'll have one for adults and one that is more family oriented. We ask for people to be over 8 years old, but sometimes we have that. So that'll get you into the collection storage. And then the museum, the library is all open stacks, so you can explore those. That's going to be the same, with microfilm. The only place that we don't really have the public in right now is our archival collections, and that's because, one, they're not very interesting to look at, right? You know, there's shelves and shelves and shelves with boxes and boxes and boxes. And so we don't normally do a kind of a behind the scenes. But if you had a special interest in seeing the ways that archives are stored and held, we could probably arrange it. Not right now, though, because we are updating our shelving. So we had our nearly 40-year-old high-density compact shelving is finally getting replaced. So right now, those things are being updated. But yeah, we do offer a variety of ways, and some of our things, our exhibits, of course, are open, and then our stacks and microfilm collections are also fully open and searchable anytime. And the others, we just take a little bit of planning.
Would vintage postcards be found under photos, like postcards from about 1910?
Sure.
Where would they be?
It would depend it really depends. So some of them are going to probably be, I would point you to special collections is probably the best spot. And then it depends on how we received them in a lot of cases. So let's say they're postcards that were to and from someone. You know, let's, for instance, from Cherokee, Iowa, somebody was writing back and forth. They might be in those person's papers, so you could look there for those. But then we're also going to have collections of postcards. You could email the Special Collections Archivist and say, I'm looking for 1910s postcards, and she would also be able to help you identify, oh, we've got a bunch of them in this collection. So that's what I would say. They would be in special collections, probably. You know, an exception, of course, was that Crying Pig was a postcard, right? But that was in the governor's collection because the governor had gotten that postcard. And so, yes, probably if it's an unsent one, it'll probably be categorized by what it's capturing in the picture. So if you were looking for a picture of McGregor, Iowa, it'll be cataloged that way. If it was sent, it'll be captured by who it was either sent to or from. But we'd be able to help you either way, probably special collections. Is that helpful? Like, yeah.
I have a big plastic Tupperware tub full of my grandparents' diaries. They were farmers in Fremont County. They aren't super interesting. It's kind of like, you know, what the weather was, drove a load of hogs to Omaha, you know, just like little jottings down, nothing real, you know, racy or interesting that I've found. But I also don't know what to do with them. Is there something that
So it kind of depends on what you want to do with them, right? And so I'm going to give a couple different answers. And one, I want to say there can be a lot of value in what you're describing, right? Of like the weather was this and that, this was that, and you know, such thus and so we went. It's interesting. Oh, you went to Omaha to sell your hogs and not Clarinda, or some, there are ways that there is interesting information there. Now, what to do with them, right? We at the state we can't collect everything. Not everything comes into our collection because we don't have unlimited space. But you can always start there. I think my colleague Jessica, who's our special collections archivist, who that would go through, often can't take it, but can say, but the Nottoway Valley Historical Society, for instance, might be interested in something like that, or the Council Bluffs, right? So there's a couple different things. There's both what we could do, but also who we know. And so there's that kind of thing. Local historical societies, regional historical societies, state historical societies, often, we may have a copy of a similar farm diary from that same time period, but Nottoway Valley may not. And so that's something that you could look at. The other option I want to highlight is if you don't feel like preserving forever and ever is the right choice for those. I think of Julia Franklin, who I mentioned earlier. She's a paper artist. If you go to her website, you can explore her art, and she has done this incredible piece where she took the records of a man who owned like the Five and Dime, or Ben Franklin, up in, I think, Storm Lake is what it was, and took his logbooks and transformed it into the shirt. And so it's the shape of the shirt that her the grandfather in that case would have worn to work every single day, and it's created out of the records that he created through his work. And so she turned it into what I find to be an incredibly moving and touching piece of art that honors his legacy, and was the right fit for that family, right? So I don't know that that's the right fit for every family, but that family said, this we don't want to do this, or there isn't a place to go, but we want to honor that. And Julia helped make that come true. And so there's lots of ways that those records can be really valuable and inspired and help contribute to telling a story. And one of those can be through preservation, and the other is perhaps through transformation. And so it's about finding what's right for you. But you can always email our colleagues and say, I'm not sure where to start. And they often know folks. So.
Right, I see Muriel in the back coming around.
I have a couple questions. One's really basic. I'm assuming you don't let people take anything out of the archives, but can they copy things, and is there a charge then for that?
Yes, so yeah, you're right. We do not we're not a lending library, is what we would say. So not like, and that includes even our books. Our books don't circulate like the Des Moines Public Library would, for instance. You can make copies, and so it depends on how you want those copies and in what way. So if you want to come with your camera or your phone and just take pictures yourself, free, go for it. If you want to use our photocopier, I think it's like 25 cents a page. If you want us to do the work for you, it's a little bit higher. So we do have some people who reach out and say, hey, I live in Norway, and I really want copies of these, and it maybe costs them $40 for us to spend 3 hours doing it, but that's a lot cheaper than a trip from Norway, and so they'll go that way. So there's a couple different ways depending on what's right for you, but if you're local and you know what you want and you are okay with pictures on your phone, which as a poor grad student is how I made it work, those are totally free.
My second question is, do you ever deaccession anything?
Yes, so we at the state do have deaccession processes. Those are actually available on our online. You can check those out. We follow a pretty stringent set of rules for those. And what that often does, just a really high level, it begins at the level of our staff who are experts kind of assessing the collection, kind of like a librarian would weed at the local library. For instance, we have, I'm trying to think of a book that perhaps is about, someone accepted years ago that was like on the history of Kentucky, and well, we don't need that book anymore, or we'll find that book is fully digitized, available online, and it isn't related to Iowa. So staff members may say, we recommend this to be deaccessioned. Then it goes to our staff collections committee. So all the people who work in collections assess what has been recommended. They have to approve it, and then it goes to our board collections committee, which has to review again, approve it, and then if they've approved, then it goes to our entire Historical Society board, which can then approve and then move, and then it can be deaccessioned. And we almost always, without fail, unless something is irreparably damaged or falling apart, put that, want to know before it's deaccessioned that it has a new home, for instance. So let's say for instance, the museum recently deaccessioned a log cabin. We had two, we just needed one. And so we had a second log cabin. It was deconstructed entirely, and we decided to deaccession it. And what they did was they actually worked with West Des Moines Historical Society that wanted a log cabin and didn't have one. And so once they knew that there was someone who had it, we knew that we already had a log cabin that was a better representation of the story and mission of ours. We worked on getting it through the process, and then it was, I think, last fall that the trucks came after all 4 steps had gone through, and we transferred that to the West Des Moines Historical Society, which I think is raising money right now to rebuild that cabin. So it's a long process, it's a careful process, and it's much more complicated than accessioning. So bringing something in is often at a staff recommendation, and it gets the green light pretty easily, but getting rid of something takes we don't do it all that often, and it's a very long and careful process. So,
Thank you. All right, got a couple more. I will say that it's similar at the Art Center when it comes to deaccessioning.
yeah,
It's a lot
it's interesting, and it's also kind of heartening. Like nothing ever just like gets set aside. Like it's always very deliberative. So.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
With the state universities, I'm wondering how you interface with the state universities and their archives. Also thinking about the Women's Archive at the
Yeah.
U of I library. The other question with materials that are older, definitely digitization, do you have like an annual goal about trying to get them off of microfiche onto, a platform that's easier to search worldwide? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll take these. So regarding the things that are older or on microfiche, that does take some maintenance, constant maintenance. Microfiche isn't forever either. It's much more stable than newspaper paper, but it isn't forever. And so a lot of times our librarians will assess where things are. We had a bunch of stuff that came down with vinegar syndrome, which if you know that world, it means that the microfilm is degrading a little bit. And so those things all of a sudden, they'll get priority. It just happens. But they get priority and they'll be put online. In a lot of ways, some of the things that are on microfiche, especially the newspapers, are already online. And so this is a second copy, and so it depends. There isn't actually, from what I understand, there is normally not a quota. There's not kind of a goal. It depends on certain projects. For a number of years, we had a newspaper project that was grant funded from the Library of Congress that allowed us to put thousands of newspapers online every year. And so we had kind of funding and a goal that allowed us to move forward with that. And so oftentimes it has to do with, do we have special funding? Are we working on a particular project? Is there an emergent need? That kind of thing. And so during that newspaper project, which was about 7 or 8 years, we were putting thousands of newspapers online every year. And so we could highlight that as kind of working on that. And now we've moved into processing some unprocessed collections, because that's the other side of things, is we get things from people and they're in a bunch of boxes, and then we, and by we I mean the archivists, not me, right, like you have to make sense of them, put them in order, that kind of thing. And so for the last couple years, there's been some more attention on the actual physical processing of things and getting them in order, because we had almost a decade of really aggressive work on digitization. So there's nothing hard and fast, but there's always kind of those projects that help. And they're often based on need, outreach, like where are things, what are people interested in, and then also sometimes emergent issues, like the vinegar syndrome allows us to say, yep, this has to happen right now, and we actually got some funding for that, and so that helps us do that. And regarding the Regent universities, they largely have their own archives. Iowa State, UNI, and the University of Iowa have their own archives. They keep their own records. If they wanted ever to transfer those to us at the state, they could. They won't. But we would be an example of that. The Board of Regents, we will often work a little bit more with them because they exist kind of between all of the institutions, right? So their records, we will often have those as state records, but normally the institutions themselves hold those. The Iowa Women's Collection is a good example of a special collection, or the Iowa Women's Archive, excuse me, and that's something that was driven by interest and a desire to do that special collecting at the University of Iowa, and it's excellent, really incredible. If you're looking to tell the story of women in Iowa, the Iowa Women's Archive does it incredibly well. One of the things that we also do is to try to not collect in ways that are competitive with the institutions, right? And so that is to say, if someone comes to us and says, we have this incredible collection of that helps you tell the story of, or let's use an example, Sandy Boyd, former president of the University of Iowa, someone says, we want to give you his papers. We might say, that sounds great, but we probably will say, that does sound great. Have you talked to the University of Iowa? Because one of the things about our work is that we tell the story of Iowa, yes, but we also want researchers to be able to find things. And so the question we would ask is, if you are interested in telling Sandy Boyd's story, would you look at the State Historical Society in Des Moines, or would you look at the University of Iowa? And we would, your first instinct is the University of Iowa. And so if the University of Iowa were to say, we don't want this, it doesn't fit our collecting goals, then we would, right? But we try not to collect things that someone would find somewhere else, right? Or could be a good fit somewhere else, right? We want to collect within our world, but also be really good partners with them. And I think that's something that my colleagues really do well, is to try to collect in ways that are really in the heart of our mission and also complement and connect people. Kind of the earlier question, if we have something, let's connect you with the Fremont County Historical Society or something like that to say, we're all in this together, and how do we best capture those stories? So we don't have any formal relationship, but we try to work well and be good partners.
All right, any more questions? We'd have time for maybe one more. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, Andrew. This was really wonderful. Thank you for presenting and sharing.
Yeah.
I hope everyone learned a lot and feels energized to connect further with the resources in our community. And really loved having you all here today. So thank you. And the museum is still open until 5, so please go and explore the galleries if you'd like to. Think about the work of archives and collections and history and how we can keep telling stories. So thank you.